In 1984, a wave of brutal, unrelenting crime strikes California. The victims have nothing in common, the murders are savage, and the police are completely lost. But what no one knows yet is that behind these attacks, there is only one man. A ghostly predator whose crimes terrify even the investigators. Today, I'm going to tell you the story of Richard Ramirez, the man America would come to know as the Night Stalker. Forget Netflix shows. What you're about to hear is far worse. If you're fascinated by true crime and serial killers, you've come to the right place. Like, comment, and subscribe. It's free and keeps us going. Now, turn off the lights, get comfortable, and let's dive into the horror together. It's June 27th, 1984, 8:30 p.m. A stolen Toyota glides through the dark streets of Los Angeles. Behind the wheel, Richard Ramirez, anonymous, invisible, just a shadow in the California night. No one notices him. No one turns their head as he passes. He is nothing more than a ghost among the crowd. He roams aimlessly until his instincts lead him to Glassell Park, a working-class neighborhood. Quiet, vulnerable. He pulls over on a side street near Forest Lawn Cemetery, slips on a pair of gardening gloves, scans his surroundings. No witnesses. Deep inside, he feels it, absolute certainty. Satan walks beside him, protects him. As long as he remains loyal to the darkness, nothing can touch him. His eyes lock onto a rundown apartment building, 2 floors, a half-open window. The heat is suffocating. The city is in the grip of a brutal heat wave. People leave their windows cracked, unknowingly inviting the devil inside. Ramirez moves in, silent, methodical, slipping through the window like a serpent. Inside, Jenny Winko sleeps soundly. She doesn't hear him rifling through her belongings. She doesn't sense his presence poisoning the air around her. Frustration builds. There's nothing worth stealing. And then another urge takes over. His hunting knife glints faintly in the dim light. He steps into the bedroom. No hesitation. No words. He strikes. Jenny wakes up screaming, but he's already on her. The blade plunges. Again and again. For the first time, Ramirez kills. For the first time, he gives into the fantasy that has haunted him since his teenage years. In her final breath, Jenny catches a glimpse of her killer. Cold, dead eyes. A stare filled with pure hatred. When it's over, he grabs a small radio as a souvenir and slips out as silently as he came. Outside, dawn begins to creep over the city. A police patrol car drives by. His heart stops for a second. The car keeps going. Satan is watching over him. A few hours later, Jenny's son, Jake, arrives at his mother's apartment. A routine visit that turns into a nightmare. The window screen is missing. Inside, an eerie silence. And then, the smell. The place is in shambles. Blood stains the floor. Then, the sight that will haunt him forever. A scream rips from his throat as he dials 911 with shaking hands. The Los Angeles detectives don't know it yet, but they've just received the call that will put them on the trail of the most elusive killer of their careers. Lieutenant Altitzer is the first senior officer on the scene. What he finds chills him to the bone. This isn't just a crime scene. It's a battlefield. Blood splatters the walls. Furniture overturned. And in the middle of the chaos, Jenny's mutilated body. Even the most hardened officers shudder. This murder is unlike anything they've seen before. The message is clear. A monster is loose on the streets of Los Angeles. Clara, the fingerprint expert, carefully examines the window where the killer entered. She finds partial prints. Not enough for an immediate match, but it's a start. These faint traces are the first tangible clue of the Night Stalker's existence. Detectives Salerno and Carrillo take the case, determined, but they have no idea what they're up against. In a county with nearly 1,000 murders a year, they're searching for a needle in a haystack. Meanwhile, Ramirez has tasted blood, and he wants more, much more. Los Angeles' nightmare has only just begun. How does someone become a monster? Richard Ramirez wasn't born a serial killer. Something inside him shattered. Something changed him. To understand the Night Stalker, we have to go back to the beginning. February 29, 1960, El Paso, Texas. A rare day, a date that only exists once every 4 years. Mercedes Ramirez gives birth to her youngest child, Richard. The pregnancy had been grueling, filled with suffering. Working in a boot factory, Mercedes was exposed daily to toxic chemicals. Nausea, dizziness. Her health deteriorated dangerously. Despite her doctor's warnings, she kept working, standing for hours on end, breathing in the fumes. The family's survival depended on it. Her own mother, Guadalupe, had warned her with words that now sound like a dark prophecy. "You're too weak, Mercedes. This child is draining your energy. It's like he's sucking the life right out of you." Ramirez, before he was even born, was already linked to the idea of taking life from others. In the modest Ramirez home, little Richard's arrival is celebrated. His siblings greet him with curiosity and affection, especially Ruth, his older sister, who exclaims when she sees him, "Look at this baby. He's so tiny and his eyes are so dark. I'm keeping him for myself like a little doll." Ruth becomes his protector, his second mother. She calls him Little Richie, smothers him with love, shields him from the tensions in the household. Because in the Ramirez home, happiness is fragile. Julian, the father, is a violent man. His anger is unpredictable, explosive, terrifying. A former Mexican police officer, he brought with him a rigid discipline and brutal methods. Ruben, the eldest brother, is the first to suffer his wrath. A rebellious spirit, constantly defying his father's authority, he endures violent beatings. Richard, barely a few months old, is already absorbing the toxic family dynamic around him. Richard is only 3 years old when he witnesses something that will forever sear itself into his young mind. A normal day, the kitchen, his father, Julian, trying to fix a leaking sink. His tools slip. The water keeps running. His frustration builds like a pressure cooker about to explode. His face tightens. His hands shake. Then suddenly, the outburst. He screams, fists clenched. Richard's older brother, Joseph, senses the coming storm and instinctively backs away. But Richard stays, fascinated, frozen, unable to look away. Then Julian does the unthinkable. He grabs a hammer and, in a pure fit of rage, begins smashing it against his own head. Again and again, blood trickles down his face. Self-inflicted violence, more terrifying than violence against others. A horrifying display of madness that etches itself deep into young Richard's psyche. Ruth quickly grabs her little brother, holding him tightly, trembling. "We need to go. Dad's like a raging bull." That image, the bull, a powerful and uncontrollable beast, will stay in Richard's mind forever, linked to masculine violence and raw power. Amidst the chaos, little Richard develops an early passion for music. Even as a baby, he reacts to melodies, moves in rhythm, taps his feet, bobs his head. Mercedes remembers fondly. Richie was like a little star, always dancing, always smiling when he heard music. These moments of joy are rare but precious. A brief escape from an increasingly dark reality. The Ramirez family lives in El Paso's Lido Street neighborhood, a rough area where violence and temptation rule. Gangs recruit teenagers. Drugs flow freely. Poverty fuels tension. In this environment, Julian's anger never fades. Even the smallest incidents trigger explosions of violence. One night, after learning that Ruben has been arrested for theft, Julian reaches new levels of brutality. At the police station, he slaps his son in front of everyone. A public humiliation, followed by something much worse behind closed doors. Back home, Julian unleashes his fury on Ruben. The belt, the fists, the insults. Mercedes' desperate pleas echo through the house. "Julian, stop. You're going to kill him." Hiding behind a door, Richard watches everything. Every scream, every blow, every muffled sob from his brother. Violence becomes a norm, a language, a way to solve problems. In these terrible moments, Ruth is always his refuge. She is his anchor, his only stability in a world spiraling into chaos. At the age of 8, Richard is diagnosed with epilepsy after suffering a seizure in the middle of class. A traumatic moment, his classmates stare at him with horror and disgust. Doctors at the time, with little awareness of the condition, prescribe minimal treatment and reassure his family. Don't worry, he'll grow out of it. A prediction that would prove tragically false. Mercedes tries to keep him at rest, but Richard is an energetic child, difficult to contain. The seizures continue, sometimes taking the form of absences rather than convulsions. For minutes at a time, he freezes, vacant, disconnected from the world. No one is truly alarmed. His epilepsy goes untreated, and Richard's mental state begins to deteriorate in ways no one notices. At school, his behavior grows increasingly strange. Polite and reserved on the surface, but prone to eerie moments of detachment. His once good grades start to slip. The nightmares intensify. He reports seeing monsters, demonic figures, not just in his sleep, but sometimes in broad daylight. These hallucinations, likely linked to his untreated epilepsy, are ignored or dismissed by those around him. As a teenager, Richard struggles to find his place. He joins the football team, hoping to fit in, to channel his energy. But after suffering a violent seizure during a game, he is kicked off the team. This rejection deepens his feelings of being different, of being an outcast. He withdraws into himself, developing a silent bitterness, one that will soon find a disturbing outlet. It is during this critical period that the most dangerous influence of his life enters the picture, his cousin Mike. Mike is a Vietnam veteran, a man the war turned into a monster, yet someone the family sees as a hero. For 12-year-old Richard, this cousin embodies raw strength, the toxic masculinity he has learned to both fear and admire. Mike doesn't hesitate to share the horrors of Vietnam with him. Graphic stories of violence, unbearable photos of Vietnamese women forced into degrading acts, scenes of mutilation, anecdotes in which he boasts about torturing and killing. These images should have traumatized Richard, terrified him, but strangely, they fascinate him. Where others would turn away in horror, Richard watches with a disturbing curiosity. Mike becomes his mentor in the art of violence. He teaches him how to fight, how to attack unseen, how to kill efficiently. Lessons pulled straight from the jungles of Vietnam, passed down with twisted pride. Together, they spend entire days smoking marijuana and using other drugs in the streets of El Paso. Every time they meet, Mike feeds Richard an endless stream of violent and grotesque stories. A toxic bond forms between them, built on a shared fascination with human suffering. Then comes the event that will push Richard over the edge. An ordinary day. A meal like any other at Mike's house. Richard is there. Mike and his wife, Jessie, are fighting. She berates him for his irresponsibility, his inability to hold a steady job, his addictions. She challenges him publicly in front of Richard. "You're nothing but a loser," she spits. A coward who thinks he's a hero. Mike, humiliated by what he sees as defiance from his own wife, turns pale. Rage builds in him like a tidal wave. Without warning, he stands up, grabs his service weapon from a shelf, and shoots Jessie in the head. Time stops. Richard is paralyzed, unable to move. This moment imprints itself onto his brain with terrifying clarity. The deafening gunshot, the acrid smell of gunpowder, the blood splattering across the table, the sudden silence. Jessie's body slowly sliding off her chair, collapsing onto the floor. Mike is arrested. He is placed in a psychiatric hospital, diagnosed with temporary insanity, a convenient classification at the time, one that downplays the gravity of his crime. Richard, deeply traumatized, retreats into total silence. He tells no one what he saw. The horror stays locked inside him, festering like a poison. From this moment on, Richard changes completely. His obsession with violence and death drives him deeper into drugs and petty crime. When he's not wandering the streets committing small thefts, he locks himself away, watching ultra-violent horror films. Horror becomes his reality, his normal, his refuge. His already fragile empathy erodes completely. He develops a macabre skill set: how to break into houses, how to bypass security systems, how to neutralize guard dogs, techniques that will later make him a terrifyingly efficient predator. These activities give him an intoxicating sense of power and control, something he never had in his chaotic childhood. At 17, Richard needs money. Petty theft is no longer enough to fuel his growing addictions. He applies for a job as a night receptionist at a local hotel. This job becomes the stage for his first sexual transgressions. With access to all the room keys, he begins spying on guests, especially women staying alone. Intrusion becomes an obsession, an intense source of excitement. He sneaks into rooms while women are showering, reveling in their false sense of security. Sometimes he enters simply to watch them sleep, savoring the invisible power he holds over them. Until the day his impulse becomes uncontrollable. After observing a young woman for several days, he decides to act. He enters her room, intent on assaulting her. But things go wrong. The woman screams. Her husband, who had briefly stepped out, returns and immediately tackles Richard to the ground. Richard is fired on the spot. Yet, surprisingly, no charges are filed. He walks away with nothing but a warning, claiming it was a misunderstanding, that he thought he was responding to a guest complaint. His family, especially his mother and sister, stubbornly refuse to see the truth. They continue to see him as an innocent boy, a victim of unfortunate circumstances. This blind protection only encourages him to continue his deviant behavior. In 1977, 4.5 years after his hospitalization, Mike is released from the psychiatric hospital. Doctors deem him stable and ready to reintegrate into society, a judgment that will prove catastrophic. For Richard, now 17, Mike's shadow looms over his life once again. His morbid mentor resumes his role with even greater intensity, determined to mold Richard in his own image. Richard has changed physically. Taller, sharper features, a hardened gaze. Shaped by experience and Mike's toxic influence, he becomes increasingly receptive to his cousin's twisted teachings. Mike instills in him a brutal worldview, one where only the strong survive and thrive. He teaches him survival tactics, urban guerrilla strategies, methods of domination. Every lesson is laced with stories of violent sexual conquests, of fantasies of absolute power. At night, Richard dresses entirely in black and roams the streets of El Paso. He perfects the art of burglary, meticulously applying Mike's advice: stay silent, observe every detail, spot weaknesses, a dog, a misplaced trash can, a fence easy to climb. These nighttime expeditions become his secret, his parallel world. Neither his father nor his mother suspects this double life, which fuels his confidence in a disturbingly twisted way. In his neighborhood, he earns a nickname, the Finger, for his uncanny ability to take whatever he wants without ever getting caught. A reputation that foreshadows the far more sinister moniker he will one day claim. During this time, Richard dates Nancy Avila, a childhood neighbor. A teenager like him, she is drawn to his mysterious aura, his dark, unreachable presence. She knows nothing about his secret life, his crimes, his disturbed mind. To her, Richard is simply different from other boys, deeper, more intense. A forbidden attraction. They meet in secret, often in unusual places. His favorite? The local cemetery. Richard takes Nancy to this place of death, where he finds an odd sense of peace. He shows her the hidden spots where he retreats when his father's rage becomes unbearable, the silent paths between graves where he can finally be himself, far from the chaos of home. Nancy, intrigued and a little frightened, lets herself be drawn into this macabre world. She sees him as a misunderstood soul, a loner searching for his place in a hostile world. A romanticized vision that blinds her to a much darker reality. Over time, Richard drifts further and further from his family. The signs of his deepening decline become impossible to ignore. His father notices his alarming appearance, gaunt, pale, bloodshot eyes. There is no doubt in his mind. Richard is using drugs. but every attempt to talk ends in violent confrontation. These arguments always end the same way, with Richard storming out, finding refuge in Los Angeles, where he sinks deeper into crime, drugs, and increasingly dark sexual fantasies. In 1983, after months without news, his sister Ruth embarks on a desperate journey to Los Angeles to find him. This is the Ramirez family's last attempt to save Richard from himself. After 3 relentless days of searching, Ruth finally finds her brother outside the Greyhound bus station. The sight of him is a shock. The man standing before her bears no resemblance to the little brother she once loved. Skeletal, cold, dead eyes, stripped of all emotion. It's as if his humanity has been drained away. Richard takes her to a rundown motel room, his home. The place is squalid, trash everywhere, used needles, walls covered in obscene graffiti and satanic symbols. Ruth, overwhelmed, breaks down in tears at the sight of her brother and his miserable living conditions. She begs him to come back to El Paso, to give his family and himself one last chance. But Richard is unmoved. Disdainful, he dismisses El Paso as too small, suffocating. Then, he speaks the words that send chills down Ruth's spine. "I'm never coming back. El Paso is too small. This is where I belong. I'm protected by Satan." This invocation of Satan, spoken with eerie conviction, reveals just how far he has fallen. Richard has crossed into a mental world where evil is his refuge, his religion, his identity. Devastated, Ruth returns to El Paso alone. She has lost her brother. The little Richie she once adored is gone, replaced by a creature she no longer recognizes. The next time she will hear of him, it will be on television, when all of America discovers, with horror, the face of the Night Stalker, the man who plunged Los Angeles into terror. Richard Ramirez is ready to begin his reign of horror. The seeds planted in his traumatic childhood are about to bear their poisoned fruit. After the murder of Jenny Winko, something inside Richard Ramirez shatters completely. Cocaine floods his veins. Sleep no longer exists. Hygiene is a distant memory. All that matters is the insatiable need for violence growing inside him. He steals to fund his addiction, dresses in black, slips into homes like a shadow, emerging with anything that can be sold. He lives in total isolation. No friends, no connections. Just him and the demons he believes he sees. In his filthy motel room, he locks himself away for days. He drowns in violent visions. Dreams of watching people suffer, writhe, die. One belief consumes him. Satan is protecting him. He is invincible. March 17th, 1985. A date that will mark the beginning of his descent into absolute horror. Ramirez buys a .22 caliber revolver, the weapon of choice for hitmen. That night, he puts on his black clothes, pulls an LA cap over his head. Highway to Hell blares in his ears. The Highway to Hell, a chilling premonition. Maria Hernandez, 20, drives home in her golden Camaro. She has no idea that a dark figure has been following her for 3 blocks. She parks, walks into her garage. The night is silent. Suddenly, movement. A man dressed in black. Maria instinctively raises her hand, holding her keys in front of her face. Ramirez fires. A miracle. The bullet ricochets off the keys. Maria collapses, pretending to be dead. Convinced he has succeeded, he enters the house. He spots Dale Okazaki, 34, Maria's roommate. She tries to hide, pleads with him. "Please, don't hurt me." A bullet to the forehead. Silence returns. Maria, still alive, takes advantage of the chaos to escape. She alerts the neighbors. Ramirez flees, leaving behind his cap. His first mistake. A few hours later, in Monterey Park, Xylian Yu, 30, stops at a red light. A man leaps out of the darkness, tries to drag her out of the car. She resists. He shoots, point blank, for no reason, no motive, just to feel power over life and death. Detective Gillis Carriot arrives at the murder scene of Dale Okazaki. The garage door is open. Bloodstains near the entrance. On the ground, an LA Raiders cap. Inside, a bloodied telephone. Dale's body face down. Carriot recalls an old lesson from his FBI training. Some killers leave clues intentionally, a twisted form of communication. But Ramirez isn't that sophisticated. He simply lost his cap. The fingerprint specialist, Clara, finds partial prints on the window, the first solid evidence of the Night Stalker's existence. Meanwhile, Tony Romero, investigating Tsai Lianyu's murder, shares a crucial piece of information. A witness wrote down part of the killer's license plate. Autopsies confirmed that the bullets used in both murders likely came from the same gun. The connection is made. A serial killer is prowling the streets of Los Angeles. March 27, 1985. 8 days since his last attack. Ramirez gets behind the wheel of a stolen Toyota, drives aimlessly, fueled only by his thirst for blood. He remembers a house in the wealthy neighborhood of Whittier. An easy target. The night swallows everything. He cuts his headlights, lets the car roll to a silent stop. Inside, Vincent and Maxine Zazera sleep peacefully, unaware that death is at their doorstep. Vincent, 64, has fallen asleep in front of the TV. Ramirez slips in through a window, aims, fires twice. Maxine, 44, jolts awake. Too late. He's already there. A looming threat. He demands money and jewelry. She tries to fight back. A shotgun hidden under the bed. She reaches for it, pulls the trigger. Click. The gun is unloaded. Her husband had removed the shells for safety. Ramirez explodes in rage, shoots her 3 times, beats her, mutilates her beyond words. In an act of extreme sadism, he gouges out her eyes, places them in a jewelry box he finds in the bedroom. The carnage is discovered at dawn. Detective Salerno takes note. .22 caliber, just like the previous ones. Valuable items stolen. It's the same man. But why the eyes, he wonders. That's new. What isn't new? A shoe print. Brand, Avia. Size, 11 or 12. A clue, but not yet a lead. The attacks escalate at a terrifying pace. Ramirez strikes everywhere. May 14th. William and Lily Doy. He shoots William. Assaults Lily, who is paralyzed from a stroke. May 29th. Mabel Bell and her sister Florence Lang. Bludgeoned with a hammer. Mabel is tied up with an electrical cord plugged into the wall. June 28th. Patty Higgins. Stabbed in her home. July 2nd. Mary Louise Cannon. Beaten to death with a vase in her own bed. Each time, the same pattern. Modest homes. Vulnerable victims. Chilling brutality. Pentagrams appear on the walls. References to Satan. A macabre ritual repeating over and over. The few survivors all describe the same psychological torture. A man who claims to act under the devil's command. On July 5th, he attacks Whitney Bennett, 16, beats her with a tire iron. She miraculously survives. The summer of 1985 is the hottest Los Angeles has seen in years. But it's not the heat keeping people awake. It's fear. Windows stay shut despite the suffocating air. Sales of alarm systems skyrocket. Guns sell out in record time. He's now called the Night Stalker, the hunter in the dark. Newspapers run headlines with every new murder. TV stations interrupt their programs for breaking news updates. His sketch is everywhere. On posters, in supermarkets, at gas stations. Comparisons to other serial killers flood the media. Ted Bundy, the Zodiac, Charles Manson. But there's one terrifying difference. Ramirez has no victim profile. Men, women, young, old, rich, poor. Anyone could be next. Anytime, anywhere. Los Angeles holds its breath, waiting for the next attack. Because everyone knows there will be one. The Night Stalker is far from done. 200 officers on the case. FBI specialists brought in. Profilers. Ballistics experts. All hunting one man. But Richard Ramirez remains untouchable. How do you catch a ghost who kills at random? No pattern. No logic. With any weapon, a gun, a knife, even a vase. Investigators are tearing their hair out. Every passing day could mean another victim. That sketch plastered everywhere. Those hollow eyes, that gaunt face. No one seems to recognize him. And for good reason. Ramirez has no friends in Los Angeles. No family. No coworkers. No neighbors who know his name. A specter in the California night. But even the smartest killers make mistakes. For Ramirez, it's his shoes. Those footprints found at multiple crime scenes. Avia sneakers. A rare model. Recently released. Investigators contact the manufacturer, who confirms it's the Avia 440. On January 9th, 1985, exactly 1,356 pairs arrived in the US from Taiwan. The killer always wears black? Then so are his shoes. 6 black pairs in size 11.5 were made. 5 were shipped to Arizona. Only 1 went to Los Angeles. A needle in a haystack, but a needle that exists. Fear changes everything. How people act, how they move, how they look at their neighbors. Angelenos lock themselves in at sundown. Doors and windows bolted shut despite the stifling summer heat. Some refuse to give in to the panic. I won't live like a prisoner in my own home, they say. They'll regret it. July 21st. Lella and Maxon Needing are found in a pool of blood by their daughter Judith. Shot, hacked with a machete. Ramirez slipped in through the backyard, then through the back door. No effort. That night, his hunger for death is insatiable. Just hours later, he strikes again in Sun Valley, the home of Chaina Rang and Somkid Kovananth, a couple of Thai immigrants. He slips in through a sliding door, shoots Chaina in the head, forces Somkid to show him where the valuables are. She suffers unspeakable terror, but survives. To testify, August 6th, Northridge, the home of Virginia and Chris Peterson, a family with a 5-year-old daughter. He enters through a slightly open sliding door, invokes Satan, shoots Virginia. The bullet goes through her left eye. Chris wakes up at the noise, charges the intruder. A violent struggle erupts. For the first time, the Night Stalker flees, leaves his gun behind, runs into the night. Virginia will survive a miracle. The bullet passed through her skull without hitting her brain. Detectives Salerno and Carrillo call an emergency meeting with all law enforcement agencies in Los Angeles. Salerno throws down a challenge to Ramirez. During this attack, the stalker showed his true colors. He's a coward. The press runs with it. The Night Stalker is front-page news. For Ramirez, it's a provocation, a challenge. He upgrades his arsenal, gets his hands on an Uzi from the black market, a weapon capable of firing 30 rounds per second, adds a pistol, an automatic weapon, handcuffs. He feels invincible. August 8th, Diamond Bar, the peaceful home of Sakina and Elias Abawath. He shoots Elias at point-blank range, kills him instantly, handcuffs Sakina, brutalizes her, demands money and jewelry. In the middle of this nightmare, their 3-year-old son wakes up, calls out for his mother. Strangely, Ramirez allows her to comfort the child, under the threat that if she disobeys, he'll kill them both. Ramirez feels the noose tightening. At the Greyhound bus station, the stairs make him uneasy. His face is everywhere. It's too risky to stay in Los Angeles. August 17th. He hastily leaves the city in a stolen Mercedes, heads north. San Francisco, a new hunting ground, fresh territory. He rents a filthy room at the Bristol Hotel, deep in the crime-ridden Tenderloin district. That night, barely settled, he finds his next target, the home of Peter and Barbara Pan, an elderly Asian couple. He slips in through a window, moves upstairs, shoots Peter as he sleeps. Barbara wakes up to a nightmare, her husband lying beside her, dead from a bullet to the head. Ramirez beats her, assaults her, then shoots her at point-blank range. With a lipstick he finds in the house, he scrawls on the wall, "Jack the Knife." Next to it, a pentagram, his demonic signature. Their son discovers the carnage in the morning. Investigators quickly link the crime to the Night Stalker. The media erupts. Terror spreads north to San Francisco. August 25th. Ramirez leaves San Francisco. Recklessly returns to Los Angeles, convinced Satan is still protecting him. He steals an orange Toyota, heads toward Mission Viejo, a quiet residential neighborhood. That night, James Romero, 13, is outside fixing his scooter. He notices the strange man behind the wheel of the orange car, memorizes part of the license plate. Ramirez stops outside the home of Bill Carnes and Carol Smith, slips inside, shoots Bill, 2 bullets to the head, ties up Carol, brutally assaults her. "Say you love Satan," he commands. He leaves the house, satisfied, meticulously wipes his prints from the stolen car. But he forgets one, on the rearview mirror. That mistake will change everything. August 27th, 1985. The detective's phone lines are flooded. One call catches Salerno's attention. A woman claims her father, a homeless man, is friends with someone named Rick near the Greyhound bus station. Rick allegedly confessed to killing an Asian couple in Monterey Park with a semi-automatic pistol. That detail was never made public. Only the killer could know. Meanwhile, the fingerprint lifted from the orange Toyota is analyzed. It's a match. A name appears in the system. Richard Ramirez, a known thief and drug dealer. His mugshot is immediately distributed to every police unit in Los Angeles and blasted across the media. The order is clear. Spread his face everywhere, immediately. August 30th, 1985. Richard Ramirez boards a bus, unaware that his face is on the front page of every newspaper, that his image is playing on every TV screen. He doesn't watch the news, doesn't read the papers. He lives moment to moment. He stops at a store to buy coffee. The customers stare. The murmurs begin. El Matador, a woman whispers in Spanish. The killer. The words set off a storm. Months of fear ignite all at once. Ramirez realizes what's happening, drops his coffee, runs. People scream. "It's him! It's him!" Sirens wail. Helicopters circle overhead. He sprints, jumps fences, cuts through backyards. A neighborhood erupts into action. Residents grab bats, metal pipes, ready to protect their families. Ramirez, exhausted, finds himself cornered in a residential street. Trapped, he tries to steal a car. The driver smashes him with a metal bar. He falls, gets up, runs again. But it's over. Drained, bleeding, he collapses, hands in the air. The crowd closes in. Shouts erupt. "Kill him! Kill him!" It takes a squad of officers to prevent a lynching. Handcuffed, he is thrown into the back of a patrol car amidst a storm of fury. Through the window, he sees the twisted faces of rage. The collective vengeance of a city that lived in terror for too long. At the Hollenbeck police station, Ramirez is broken, but his arrogance remains. Facing detectives Salerno and Carrillo, he briefly admits he followed Satan's path, traces a circle on the table, like he's drawing a pentagram, then stops, demands a lawyer, shuts down. His transfer to Los Angeles County Jail requires a full-scale operation. For cars, 8 motorcycles, a helicopter. At every intersection, furious faces, fists pounding the air. Inside his high-security cell, Richard Ramirez paces the tiny space that is now his world. The Night Stalker is finally caged, but for the victims' families, the nightmare is far from over. July 22nd, 1988. The Los Angeles courthouse is under siege. Journalists, cameras, onlookers, all waiting for a glimpse of the monster who terrorized California. Richard Ramirez steps into the courtroom. A crisp black suit, slicked back hair, a stark contrast to the filthy, wild-haired fugitive captured 3 years earlier. But his eyes haven't changed. Cold, calculating, emotionless. He raises his hand, reveals a pentagram drawn on his palm, and shouts, "Hail Satan." It's only the beginning of a grotesque spectacle that will last over a year. The trial of the Night Stalker is no ordinary court proceeding. It's an event. A media explosion unlike anything before. Every day, crowds gather, desperate to secure a seat in the courtroom. Fans, curious onlookers, relatives of the victims, all crammed into the same space. Ramirez revels in the attention, smirks at the cameras, waves at his fans, plays the media like a virtuoso. For him, this isn't punishment. It's his grand performance. August 3rd, 1988. The Los Angeles Times reports a chilling revelation. Prison guards have caught Ramirez plotting the assassination of the prosecutor. He had planned to smuggle a weapon into the courtroom. Security is immediately reinforced. A metal detector is installed at the entrance. Every person is thoroughly searched. The message is clear. Even behind bars, the Night Stalker is still dangerous. August 14th. Juror Phyllis Singletary is absent from court. A few hours later, she is found murdered in her apartment. Panic spreads among the other jurors. The unspoken fear. Could Ramirez have orchestrated this murder from his cell? The truth emerges quickly. Her boyfriend was the killer. He took his own life after killing her. A horrific coincidence. But the damage is done. Fear has spread once again. The case against Ramirez is overwhelming. Physical evidence, witness testimonies, fingerprints found at no fewer than 10 crime scenes. Prosecutor Phil Halpin presents the horrifying list of atrocities, describes in chilling detail every crime scene, every wound inflicted, every humiliation. Survivors take the stand. Their words, precise and haunting, send shivers through the courtroom. Maria Hernandez shows the scar where a bullet ricocheted off her keys. Virginia Peterson describes how the bullet passed through her face without killing her. Sanket Kovananth relives the hours of horror at the hands of the Night Stalker. The families of the victims weep silently. Some leave the courtroom, unable to bear the gruesome details. Ramirez remains expressionless. Occasionally, a faint smirk crosses his lips, especially when a witness recounts his most sadistic acts. His chilling indifference is as shocking as the crimes themselves. His lawyers attempt the impossible, humanizing the inhuman. They speak of his traumatic childhood, the abuse, the domestic violence, the toxic influence of his cousin Mike. They bring in medical experts who discuss untreated epilepsy, drug-induced psychosis. But faced with the sheer brutality of his crimes, these arguments feel pathetic. How do you ask for mercy for a man who gouged out his victim's eyes? Who forced women to swear loyalty to Satan at gunpoint? The defense is doomed, and Ramirez knows it. He shows no remorse, no regret, no empathy for his victims or their families. Only once, when his sister Ruth takes the stand, does something flicker in his eyes. A brief, fleeting moment of humanity in an abyss of darkness. Ruth describes the little brother she raised, little Richie with his shy smile, the child terrified of his father's rage. But even this emotional testimony cannot erase the truth. That little boy has become a monster. September 20th, 1989. After 9 days of deliberation, the jury delivers its verdict. Guilty. Guilty on 43 charges. 13 murders, 5 attempted murders, 11 sexual assaults, 14 burglaries. The courtroom falls eerily silent. No cheers, no applause, just the crushing weight of justice finally served. Ramirez doesn't flinch, doesn't move. His face is a stone mask. November 7th. Sentencing phase. The decision is announced. Death. San Quentin's gas chamber. For the first time, Ramirez reacts, not with fear, not with regret, but with a detached, almost surreal attitude. He turns to the journalists and delivers a phrase that will haunt America. It doesn't matter. Death has always been part of the deal. See you in Disneyland. One last provocation. One final mockery of the society he terrorized. The trial cost California $1.8 million. The most expensive in state history until the O.J. Simpson trial in 1994. The cell door slams shut. The metallic clang echoes like a final sentence. Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, begins his new life on death row at San Quentin. 6.5 feet by 10 feet. A metal bed. A sink. Gray walls. 23 hours of isolation per day. For most condemned inmates, this is the beginning of oblivion, the slow descent into anonymity before the inevitable lethal injection. But Ramirez isn't like the others. His notoriety doesn't fade behind bars. It grows. It evolves. It becomes something even more disturbing. The letters begin to arrive. At first, just a few, then dozens, then hundreds. Women, fascinated by his story, captivated by his dark eyes on magazine covers. They write to him, send him photos, love letters. This phenomenon has a name: hybristophilia, the attraction to those who commit extreme violence. Psychologists try to explain the morbid fascination. They talk about beauty and the beast syndrome, a distorted maternal instinct, a desire for fame by association. But no rational explanation can truly justify this collective madness. Among these hundreds of admirers, one stands out: Doreen Leoie, a magazine editor, educated, intelligent. She starts writing to him in 1985, just after his arrest. The correspondence intensifies over the years. 75 letters exchanged. In 1988, against all odds, Ramirez proposes to her. October 3rd, 1996. San Quentin Prison. A surreal event unfolds in the visitation room. Ramirez, dressed in his blue prison uniform, waits. Doreen arrives in a simple white dress. A veil, a bouquet. The ceremony is brief, minimal, surrounded by armed guards. I promise to be faithful to you in wealth and poverty, in sickness and health, until death do us part. Spoken in this place by this man, sentenced to death for 13 murders, the words take on a chilling weight. Doreen Leoie is now officially Mrs. Richard Ramirez. When journalists press her about her incomprehensible choice, she answers with unwavering conviction. He's kind, he's funny, he's charming. I believe he's innocent. I wouldn't have married him if I thought he had killed those people. America is split between fascination and disgust. How can an educated woman marry a monster? Doreen is not alone. Other serial killers have married behind bars. Ted Bundy, Charles Manson, Kenneth Bianchi. This phenomenon exposes the dark side of fame, the hunger for notoriety at any cost, even when it's born from absolute horror. While Ramirez lives his life as a celebrity inmate, his shadow continues to loom over American culture. Books recount his story. Documentaries dissect his crimes. TV series draw inspiration from his twisted path. His nickname, the Night Stalker, enters the lexicon of American horror alongside the Zodiac, Jack the Ripper, and Ted Bundy. Extreme metal bands incorporate his satanic statements into their lyrics. Controversial artists exploit his imagery. A macabre industry forms around him. Trading cards, t-shirts, memorabilia. Some psychologists raise concerns. Does this glorification of serial killers risk inspiring future predators? The victims' families are outraged. Watching the murder of their loved ones turned into a pop culture icon is unbearable. They fight to ensure that people remember not the killer, but those he stole from the world. Jenny Winko, Daily Okazaki, Peter and Barbara Pan, and so many others. Shattered lives, destroyed families. The true legacy of the Night Stalker. The years pass on death row. Appeals pile up. Legal battles drag on. The execution, repeatedly postponed, starts to feel like it will never happen. Like many U.S. states, California is paralyzed by the debate over capital punishment. Ramirez grows older. His body, already weakened by years of substance abuse, begins to fail. By 2009, Doreen stops visiting. Their relationship has deteriorated. Did she finally doubt his innocence? Or did she simply grow tired of being the monster's wife? June 7, 2013. Marin General Hospital, near San Quentin. Richard Ramirez dies of cancer at age 53. Alone. No dramatic execution. No final defiant words. Just the banal end of a sick man. For the victims' families, it's a mix of relief and bitterness. Justice never had the final say. Death was too easy for him, said one victim's daughter. He should have suffered like he made others suffer. Tell me in the comments, what shocked you most about this case? And more importantly, which story do you want to see next? If you haven't already, subscribe. It's free and it keeps us motivated to continue. Don't forget to hit like. It only takes a second, but it helps tremendously. See you next Friday at 5 p.m. for another dive into horror. And until then, stay safe. This was the Voice of Crime.